Yo, 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 yo. This is Candy B Knittin. I'm Candy B. I be knittin'. And this week I want to introduce y'all to Martha. This is Martha by Louise Crowther, and this is a doll I knit for my daughter. I'm not going to go too deep. Usually at this point I would do like a deep dive video going into the details of the pattern. I think y'all know how I feel about the pattern. I'm not big on knitting toys and dolls. But I will give you a rundown of the specs and the outcome and lessons learned. This is a pattern from a book called Knitting Toys and Dolls, and the doll in here is called Martha. The patterns in this book are meant for fingering weight yarn. I just used a mixture of all the different worsted weight yarns. So there's acrylic, cotton, all kinds of just scrappy yarns put together. And so obviously gauge wise, proportion wise, my doll is much bigger than it would have been in fingering weight. I just used size 6 needles with a worsted weight yarn for the whole thing, just so I could have a pretty decently tight gauge, because then when you start stuffing, of course you don't want the stuffing to show through and you want a nice structure. Aside the fact that I'm not a huge fan of knitting toys, I'm not a huge, this whole thing is knit flat and then seamed. Aside from that, okay pattern. I've been knitting for a few years now, so I would call this more of like an advanced knitting pattern, just because there is a certain amount of kind of cleverness it comes to like sewing things together and knowing how to seam things together. There's no like schematic in the book. The one, like, I feel like fair critique I could make of the pattern, at a certain point she refers to like the shoes. When you're making them, she talks about like the top of the shoe, and I just had this strange feeling that something was off with the shoes, and I read some Ravelry notes, and the way she talks about the top of the shoe, it's actually backwards. You knit the shoe upside down than what you would think from the pattern. And yeah, as far as like the knitting, the flat parts and seaming them together, it would have been nice to have some sort of schematic or shape of what you were making, considering there's so many little intricacies of how things fit together. But I did it. I made it. Once I actually like sat down and focused on what I needed to do, it really wasn't that arduous of a task. I was kind of making it worse on myself because I was taking longer than I should have, and so I'm kind of in this, I started to get into this groove where literally just every weekend I was working on this. I guess some lessons learned, because this is for one of my children, and I have 2 children, and so I have to make another one, and so I do have some lessons learned. I've gotten a lot better at seaming. It calls for mostly mattress stitching, and I'm now like a mattress stitching pro, so I'm very eager to see how much my skills improve on the second doll. The other thing you can obviously see here, the neck is a bit floppy. The cast on for the body, and then you sew the body to the head, is quite narrow, and I really tried to stuff it really good, but it's kind of settled now that it's been played with a little bit, and so what I would like to do is knit the whole second doll and apply some of my learnings, and then probably if I can figure out a good way, because I thought I stuffed the neck pretty good, but it's starting to shift around. So my second doll, I'm going to play around with, really stuffing the neck a lot, and I might go back and unsew this and sew it back and stuff it really good again, and try to get a little bit more structure in the neck area. For the most part, my daughter is over the moon with this thing. Like at a certain point, like, one of the differences between the pattern is that there's ribbons on her buns, and I was like, oh, you want me to tie ribbons on there? She's like, no, just give it to me. And she loves it. She's just super excited. And I asked my other daughter, I was like, do you like this? Do you still want me to make you one? She's like, yes, please. And so the reviews are in, they love it. The other thing is, I'm obviously working off gauge, kind of just improvising with the pattern. And this yarn I used is a Premier cotton yarn, which I think might have a little bit of polyester in it or something, but it's a lot looser as far as drape goes for a cotton yarn. And so the pants are quite loose. And so I've just kind of tied a piece of yarn around here as like a little belt. But once I finish the second doll and kind of play around with gauge and stuff, I might go back and re-knit the pants just a little tighter. I was nervous that the pants wouldn't fit her because, I'm completely, winging the pattern using totally different yarn. And so the pants are way too baggy now. And so I think I might need a little bit of just negative ease in the pants. There's a little bit of places where I can see like the shoes are knit in one piece and then you knit a strap that you sew on, and the strap is just a little bit loose. So there's just little areas as the doll is played with that I'll have to go in and kind of tighten up. But the kiddo is happy. The other note here I have is, as far as stuffing goes, I have a mixture of scrap yarn I took and kind of ran through some hand carders to fluff up, and then I mixed some just old scraps of clothes. I was going to use mostly clothing scraps, but they get quite heavy, like cotton t-shirts I've ripped up and stuff like that. And so I had to kind of mix in the scrappy yarn to give it some airiness. And that actually took me quite a bit of time. All the cutting up and fluffing actually took more than the seaming time. So yeah, I'll probably need to just make time to sit down and just make a whole bunch of stuffing. But yeah, I can already see some places where she's gotten a little bit compressed where I can go back and kind of fill things in a little bit, but I'm going to wait till I finish the second doll. The other thing is the face. She has in the pattern where you use felt on the back of the face and you sew the felt down and you draw the face on. And I just Googled, I just did a little V. I just Googled, amigurumi mouth, and I just did it like that because I was trying to make a smile and it just was not working. Other than that, I'm pleased as punch. I've started the second doll. So this is Martha. And my other child has requested, what is her name? I think it's Penny, I want to say. Polly. And so this is Polly, and this is what I'm starting to work on now. And just with some learnings from the first pattern, I have finished I finished Polly's head, and it's knit. All the heads are knit flat using intarsia, so you get like the hairline. And so I still followed those instructions, but this time around, now that I have a little bit more confidence, I know what the pattern wants me to do. I'm looking for places that I can kind of improvise a little bit, and so this is the body. And the thing about Polly is that it's almost going to be like she has two outfits in one, because her body has like a undershirt almost, and so her body is her shirt, basically, is what I'm saying. And so I've started this, but it was knitted flat in the pattern, and I have changed it to be knit in the round. The other thing I've done, because the neck is so narrow on Martha, and I think that's lending to the floppiness of the neck, I actually cast on more stitches for the body just so I have more space, and I'm going to stuff it that much more and see if that helps a little bit. And so yeah, she's going to have she's got tights on and like an undershirt on, and then her little hands are going to be brown. Her little feet have boots on them, and then she's got like leggings on, and then she's going to have a sweater, and she's going to have a bag. And I'm just chugging along. I'm really kind of embracing it. I've done my fair share of complaining, but I think I complain because I'm not comfortable with certain things, or because I feel like, I need to like I kind of write myself off sometimes and be like, well, I'm not good at that. I just can't sew. I can't do that. I can't do this. And so I'm gaining a little bit more confidence, and so I'm able to be less negative, I guess you could say. Speaking of seaming things, I do want to show y'all my Kagan's quilt. I finished the first motif and I've started to sew together. There's 16 squares in the first motif, and I've started to sew them together. And like I said, I'm embracing the things that I thought I'm not good at or I don't like. And I think it's all about just finding the space to be like just in the groove, you know, like I do like to knit and I like to spend most of my time knitting, but you know, a lot of knitting is other things like seaming. And so once I mentally prepare myself and say, hey, you know, you're going to have to seam this, then once I embrace it, I'm just like, okay, this is where I'm at. I got to do it. You know, this is what I chose. And so I'm learning a lot. It's supposed to be mostly mattress stitch, but then there's, because they're all individual squares, it's not always easy to do like a traditional mattress stitch where you're doing a selvage edge against a selvage edge, a selvage edge against a selvage edge. There's times where you're doing a selvage edge with a cast on, sometimes you're doing the cast on with the cast off. So I've actually been utilizing my Vogue knitting book as far as ways to seam, and I think it's coming out really well. I actually took some things apart and redid some things to make it a little bit nicer, because Kagan's quilt is a fingering weight pattern, and I'm doing it in DK, and I'm doing DK on size 8 needles, US size needles, and so it's a much looser gauge. Oh, and so I'm doing DK weight yarn on size 8 needles, and then Kagan's quilt is actually a garter stitch pattern, but because I'm doing such a loose gauge, I think stockinette looks better looser than garter stitch does, and so I'm doing the whole pattern in stock. So I'm rewriting the pattern to be in stockinette. And so when you're off gauge and you're making a square and an off gauge, you end up with almost like a rhombus, like it's skewed right here. So the cast on edge and the cast off edge are rather snug, and then you have like these looser stitches up here, so the proportions of all the squares are off. And so part of the seaming process is about kind of making it all fit together, because at first I sewed these together and I was like, oh, I'm mattress stitching, let me do a selvage edge against a selvage edge. And when you do that, where the squares are off, I ended up with like this puckering. And so now I'm re-sewing it, so I mix up doing a selvage edge against like a cast on or a cast off edge, so that they kind of, I can kind of go in and kind of fudge the proportions. And so there's a little bit of buckling and puckering, but not as nearly as much as there were before, as I was kind of playing with this. And then I have mostly selvage edges against cast on or cast off edges, and then the way my squares are set off, every edge is going to be a selvage edge. So then when I go in to pick up for my, I'm going to do an I-cord border, and so when I go in to pick up for my I-cord border, I can kind of tighten up the selvage edges on this edge too. And you know, you can kind of see it coming together a little bit. I definitely double and triple checked, you know, having everything at the correct angle, because I also rotated these squares, because in the original pattern you had, you guys can see here how the middle of this square is going here, the middle of this square is going here. In the actual pattern, it's all X's. I did a terrible job of explaining that, but if you've made a miter squared or a squares in the bias, you know what I'm talking about. But I knew I wanted this star pattern with the 4 different main colors I have in the blanket. And I think it's coming out really well, because it's like the thing with seaming is it feels like such a drag, but you can't argue with the end results. And I knew I wanted this end result. I knew I wanted this, you know, quilt inspired, and then you have like you look on the wrong side and you have like these seams, and I just wanted something that just had that look to it, and there's no way around it. I'm on the second motif of the blanket, and it's more squares, short row squares, but this time you're doing it continuously with no seaming. And so, yeah, and it's much bigger. It's like, these are going to be the same size, but these are 16 squares sewed together. And then this is going to be a similar size, but it's actually, let me hold this in a way that it makes sense. It's going to be 4 big squares instead of 16 smaller squares, but it's all done in one piece, which is cool because it's much less seaming. And it's some fun shaping that happens, but you know, this is where the split is, and yeah, it's a nice clean edge, but nothing, like when you want something seamed, you want something seamed, you want something seamed. And so it's just like, okay, like, yes, it's very cool. It's pretty cool that I know how to do this without seaming, and I can do it in one piece, but at the same time, I really wanted that look of, you know, that hand sewed look. You can't really beat that. And so it is what it is, but this is going to be the second motif, and I'm actually moving pretty quickly on this, which it's a trade-off, right? It's like, what kind of making do you want? Oh no, my drum carder is over here. I just did this on top of my drum carder. That was a bad idea. It's like this, like, nice, slow, meditative, thoughtful. I put on a audio book and just, like, you know, really meticulously go through and pick up stitches and, you know, make sure everything's looking right. And then you have this where I can sit down and watch TV and just kind of chill and just knit. And, you know, I think I started this one this week, and I'm almost done with this whole thing. And so it just depends on what kind of making experience you're looking for. And it's cool that this is all one pattern. So if I did want to make a nice hand sewed quilted blanket with a bunch of scrap yarn, I know how to do that now. And this, because I'm doing the DK weight on the size 8 needles, when I'm done with this is going to be the size of a decent sized baby blanket. Or, you know, if I have just one huge ball of yarn, I know how to make a huge blanket using this, you know, quilted motif, but I can do it all in one piece. And it's like, has this nice visual look at the same time. It looks more complicated than it is, long story short. And it's cool that I have one pattern that I can play around with. In the end, there's going to be 4 squares. The next one are, so you have 16 squares sewed together. Then you have 4 squares done in one continuous piece. Then there's slants on the bias. Then there's a chevron motif, and all 4 of these are going to be sewed into one big blanket for my bed. But now that I own this pattern, I can pick and choose any number of these motifs and make whole blankets out of them using any gauge. And that is the positive side to you know, having a bunch of different skill sets and a pattern that complements all those different skill sets. So that's that. I'm just going to throw this back here. And I have like my nice work table back here where I just stand and I just knit a few squares at a time. I am using this needle here. Is not a traditional darning needle for like yarn. Usually people weave in ends with like a nice blunt needle with a large eye on it. This is actually a needle that is for carpet repair, and I like it because it's nice. It has like a nice weight to it, so that when I'm sewing things together, sometimes, you know, if I'm using too fine a needle, it puts an extra strain on my hand. I like having something with some weight to it. It's got a nice sharp tip, which is a blessing and a curse. When you get right into the stitch, it can be a blessing. This yarn I'm using is the Happy Place by Tony Lipsy for Hobie Yarn. and it's a bit splitty because I think it's because it's wool and cotton together, and wool and cotton don't necessarily play very nicely together sometimes. And so it's a bit splitty, and so I do end up going between ply sometime, but I do like being able to really see what I'm doing, and a nice tool with some weight to it. And so that's it. I'm gonna toss that back there. I've caked up the rest of this yarn for my project. I might end up having to order more yarn. I'm at the point in the project where I'm really starting to weigh things and making sure I have enough, and I'm starting to kind of calculate what my bind off might look like and all that jazz. But that's that. At this point, after I do this one obviously is, fairly well planned out. And then the rest of them are kind of like just different widths of stripes, and so I think I can play around with the scraps I have left. I would hate to order like a bunch more of this yarn just to finish this blanket because I don't want to have too much left over. I do like this yarn, and I do want to find a project that will use the scraps, but I really want to be mindful. If I end up ordering more, I want to order just enough to finish the blanket. And if anything, I would order more of this almond color because it is a neutral. And so this is what my I-cord is going to be. And so, yeah, if I do order more, I'll order more of this rather than, I don't want to, if I run out of yellow, I'll just grab some of the green or something like that. It's not that important. I would like to try some different colors, and I know that they've changed some of the colors. For instance, I ordered the red, and it's much more orangey, but I think when they redid the red, they made it redder, I think. And then the other thing is this teal color I got, because almost every color, not the almond obviously, but most of the colors have a solid and more of a melange color, and I felt like the teal, the melange, and the solid color match a little too much, and I think they might have changed that on future dye runs. Like for instance, that's what I'm doing on this. You can see very clearly the yellow. This is the melange yellow, and then this is the solid yellow. It's a lot less evident on my teal square which one is the solid and which one is the melange. One of these days I'm gonna figure out how to show y'all stuff. But yeah, I don't know if you can tell in this lighting which one is solid. You can kind of tell better when they're side by side, but if someone randomly gave me one of these balls, I have to keep the ball band with the yarn to know which one is which. I think I'm gonna leave it there. I don't have any I have my lapoof. I've steamed blocked my lapoof, and I want to get started on the button band, but it's just going to take some measuring and some thoughtfulness because I want to do a double knit button band. And I'm like, everything I'm seeing with it is saying to just knit a band and then sew the band on. But I want to try to like pick up and knit and do the button band. And so it's going to take some thoughtfulness, and I'm double knitting, so I need to be thoughtful about the gauge that I'm getting and thinking about, how I want the final cardigan to fit, because it's like right now it's fairly open with the idea that you add a button band, and once you add the button band, that's the final, like how you want the sweater to close. And so I just need to think about that, like, do I want more of a cropped fitted look, or do I want something a little bit more relaxed? Things to think about. So this has been Candy Bee Knittin'. I'm Candy Bee. I be knittin'. You can also find me on Instagram at Rulude. I'm also at Rulude on Ko-fi, or you can send me an email, candybknittin@gmail.com. Hit me with a comment below, share and like this video, all that good YouTubey stuff. Until next time, peace.